though that this too sallied flesh would melt, fall, in resolve.
Too solid flesh would melt.
Too solid flesh would melt.
Too solid flesh would melt.
Too sallied.
Too solid flesh.
Too sallied flesh. Too sallied flesh. Too sallied flesh. Too sallied flesh. Too sallied flesh. Too sallied flesh.
Too solid flesh. Too solid flesh.
Hello and welcome to Strange Detectives, a YouTube channel about strange and unusual detective fiction. My name is Xavier and I'm super excited to be doing my first actual book review for this channel. I've chosen a book that is very near and dear to my heart. It's something like the platonic ideal, I think, of the type of fiction I'd like to talk about on this channel. It's pulpy, it's campy, it's a little shaggy, but it's also one of these books that's unafraid to just take every little scrap of the highbrow and the lowbrow, all the cliches, all the tropes, put them in the blender, set the blender to puree, let it ride for a while, and then drink the green toxic sludge that comes out the other end. That's right, baby. We're talking about 1989's Too Solid Flesh by Nick O'Donohoe. And if you haven't guessed by the title or the cover art, today's strange detective is none other than, drumroll please, Hamlet. That's right, Hamlet, the Crown Prince of Denmark, the emo boy of Elsinore, and the terror of curtains everywhere. Let me set the stage a little bit. Set the stage? Let me set the table. When I first discovered this copy of Too Solid Flesh at a used bookstore in Detroit, I read the synopsis on the back and I nearly shouted out loud. It was that sensation you sometimes get when you feel like the book you've discovered has been written for you, or like with you in mind. And you know, that's a feeling that I think all of us crave. And then I read it for the first time and I was blown away. You know, I went into it expecting like a late 80s kind of cyberpunky, pulpy thing. And it is that, don't get me wrong, but there is so much more going on with this book that I think it's a strange detective classic, and it really deserves to be better known. Let me give you the premise of the book, and then we'll see if you agree with me.
It is the not-so-distant future. The lower parts of Manhattan are filled up with seawater as the seawalls break down and a cycle of superstorms constantly threaten to drown the city's poor. New York's elites go living unbothered by the climate catastrophe. They pass their time in luxurious idleness. They watch movies and plays and operas. Only there are no longer any actors in this world. There's no need for actors anymore. Theater is dead. The holographic technology has gotten so good that the rich would rather just watch movies using simulated ghost images of famous movie stars of the past. There is only one theater left in the city that doesn't use the holograms, called the New Globe Theater. Only at the Globe, there aren't any actors either, not really, because the New Globe Theater is not a theater at all, but a science experiment run by a mysterious corporation. And the actors at the Globe are not actors. They are androids, lifelike robots built by a mysterious corporation. Every night, the androids stage a production of William Shakespeare's Hamlet. One dark and stormy night, the scientist who built these robots, Dr. K. Peck, dies a mysterious death when a biotoxin accidentally drips into his ear canal. Hamlet, the robot, confronted with this devastating news that his creator has died, follows his programming. He suspects a murder most foul.
All right, I don't know about you, but for me, that is a 10 out of 10 premise for a strange detective novel. One of the things I love so much about what O'Donohoe has done here is that he's recognized that if you squint at the tragedy of Hamlet, you can start to see the makings of like a golden age Asimovian piece of sci-fi fiction. And then he notices that if you squint maybe just a little bit harder, you can also find all of the same beats of like a whodunnit or a thrill-a-minute piece of detective fiction. And O'Donohoe is unafraid to simply grab the bull by both horns, you know? He's just gonna say, F it, cyberpunk Shakespeare sci-fi mystery novel. And I love that. So let's talk about this Asimovian reading of Hamlet. One of the central conceits of 2-2 Solid Flesh is that there's this laboratory/theater, and they're trying to create artificial intelligence, only they haven't really cracked the problem yet. And so what they do is, the solution they've stumbled upon is to use the personalities that have been created in Shakespeare's plays as something like scaffolding for the personalities of the robots that they're building. The idea is that the robots will learn to be human by learning to be Shakespearean characters first. And this is an idea that actually dovetails quite nicely with something that Harold Bloom might have written. The literary critic Harold Bloom was famous or notorious for making the audacious statement that Shakespeare somehow invented what it means to be a modern human being. I actually have his book right here, Shakespeare and the Invention of the Human, and let me just read a passage from the introduction.
The idea of Western character, of the self as a moral identity, has many sources. Personality, in our sense, is a Shakespearean invention, and it is not only Shakespeare's greatest invention but the cause of his perpetual pervasiveness. Insofar as we value, and deplore, our own personalities, we are the heirs of Falstaff and Hamlet.
Alright, so that's Harold Bloom. Shakespeare is inventing human beings. I personally think that a lot of this is kind of silly, but I think it's undeniably fascinating to do what O'Donohoe does and just take Bloom literally. I mean, what would it mean if Shakespeare really did invent human beings? Before Shakespeare, according to Bloom, there were no human personalities, and then after Shakespeare, here we are. In that sense, Shakespeare is something like Dr. Frankenstein, right?
It's alive!
Or else he's like a mad scientist in a cyberpunk dystopia, which is exactly what O'Donohoe does with him.
It's fascinating.
And one of the consequences of this for the novel is that each of the robots has a different level of human sophistication according to the sophistication of the roles they've been assigned to play in Hamlet. So it's kind of like on a scale. On one hand, you have like the Rosencrantzes and the Guildensterns, which are little more than toaster ovens. Their parts aren't very well written, and because of this, as robots, they're not very good. They can recite their lines, and that's basically it. And this is perfect, because isn't this what a character like Polonius reminds you of? Like a broken robot, or maybe like a annoying automated voice messaging system?
For a list of shop-worn aphorisms, press 1.
Give every man thine voice, but few thine ear. Costly thy habit is thy purse may buy. Neither a borrower nor a...
And as we move up the cast list, the character's human intelligence slowly becomes more and more sophisticated. So the Gertrude robot is a little more sophisticated than the Polonius robot, and the Ophelia robot is actually quite sophisticated, although her emotional chip or whatever has gone haywire, of course. And then at the tippity top, we have Hamlet, which the novel suggests the Hamlet robot, may have actually achieved sentience or artificial intelligence. And isn't this like a really fun way to read Hamlet? Because there is a reading of the play, the way the play is presented, where Hamlet is basically like a petulant child, It's like, boo-hoo, your daddy died, you're sad.
How weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of the world.
And all the other normies just go about their business, and all of them are just NPCs or droids or, beasts for want of reason, is what Hamlet calls them. But they might as well be robots, right? Or toaster ovens. You know, because there's this egoism at the center of Hamlet, which, yeah, if you're Harold Bloom, can be quite beautiful, but there's also some, like, sinister undertones there, you know? And one of the implications, for the novel at least, is that when Hamlet's creator is found dead in his laboratory, Hamlet is the only one of the robots, either with the emotional sophistication or else with a large enough ego to actually want to do something about the crime. And this is how we get Hamlet the robot detective, which I love. Because Hamlet really does have a lot of the same beats as like a classic murder mystery. You know, we get the discovery of a murder right at the very beginning, and from that moment on, I mean, Hamlet's basically Sherlock Holmes, right?
Murder! Murder! Most foul!
He goes around interrogating his friends. He puts on disguises to confound his rivals. He comes up with this harebrained scheme to catch the conscience of a king. You know, he's not going to rest until the killer is found. And it's this finding, I think, that's really important. This idea that Hamlet somehow needs to discover his father's killer, or somehow prove Claudius's guilt. And this is a crucial distinction, I'd argue. If you compare Hamlet to another play like The Spanish Tragedy by Thomas Kyd, well, in that play, Belle Imperia, she knows the score from the get. She knows who the bad guys are, and she knows that she's going to kill them the moment she steps on stage. Here comes he that murdered my delight. But Hamlet, quite famously, he lacks any of Belle Imperia's courage or conviction. One of the central questions of the play, if not the central question of the play, is why does Hamlet take so long? You know, why does Hamlet dither? And there's been 1,000,001 reasons or interpretations given for Hamlet's strange behavior, but secretly I like O'Donoghue's best, which is basically that Hamlet's not dithering, right? Hamlet is a detective.
Oh, that's right. Sometimes you forget I'm a detective.
And another reason that I love this novel is for the Watson character. The Watson figure is technically the protagonist of this novel, and I haven't even talked about him at all. And that's probably because Hamlet, you know, sucks up the oxygen in every scene he's in. But the Watson character is even more fascinating than Hamlet robot detective. The Watson in 2-2 Solid Flesh is an actual detective, like a human being police detective. And his backstory is that before he was a detective, he really wanted to be an actor. Only, you know, in this dystopia, there's no actors anymore because the theater is dead. In any case, he gets his big break when the murder at the laboratory occurs, and he gets sent in undercover. And his cover story is that he is going to be the robot that plays Horatio. And naturally, as Hamlet's best friend, the two decide to team up and solve the murder together. So just imagine, right? You've got this guy, and he's basically like the last living actor on planet Earth, only he's pretending to be a robot who's pretending to be a person who's pretending to be Horatio from the tragedy of Hamlet. And this isn't even the half of it. 2-2 Solid Flesh is packed with all sorts of these types of goodies. There's an argument between Marlon Brando and Maria Zelnick on the nature of acting. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein plays an important role. There's these long, beautiful passages on Russian ballet. There's quite funny references to Tom Stoppard's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. Like I said, everything goes into the blender, and what comes out, I really, really like.
Brilliant! Brilliant!
Alright, on this channel though, there is one important question which I always want to ask and answer about the strange detective novels that we talk about. And that is the mystery any good? Well, unfortunately, this is where I have some bad news. I cannot in good faith recommend 2-2 Solid Flesh on its strength as a whodunit or a mystery novel. There are a few choices that O'Donoghue makes with his plotting which I simply cannot endorse. So, for example, there comes a point in the novel where Hamlet, the robot detective, and Horatio, the human detective, well, the case runs cold, so to speak. So what they do is they go to one of the laboratory's computer terminals and they hack into it. And the way they're able to get away with this hacking, or able to pull it off, is that Hamlet guesses the password.
No way. I'm getting hacked.
Now, maybe, if your novel is otherwise perfectly plotted, it is a perfect locked room mystery, and you've accounted for every other detail, maybe in that case, you can get away with a password guess hacking scene. But you only get one, and that's a maybe. 5 times Hamlet pulls this off, with 5 different passwords.
I can't stop him. Do something, McGee.
I've never seen code like this.
There are 5 separate times when Hamlet doesn't know what to do with the case, so he simply walks up to the nearest computer terminal and guesses the password.
I'm getting hacked.
So the computer asks for like a 10-character password, and Hamlet strokes his robot chin and says, "Oh, easy, Fortinbras." And it turns out to be correct. I mean, honestly, if the lab techs at the Globe Theatre had simply used the password, this story might not have ever gotten off the ground. So if these types of cheap tricks are likely to make you throw your book against the wall, then maybe 2-2 Solid Flesh isn't for you. But if you're anything like me, and you love Shakespeare sci-fi mashups, and you love detective sci-fi mashups, and you've ever wondered what the sweet spot in the Venn diagram where all 3 of these things meet might look like, then I can't recommend 2-2 Solid Flesh enough. I highly think it's worth going and trying to track down a copy of this book. If you have read this book, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. And also, I'd like to know what some of your favorite Shakespeare detective mashups are. This is admittedly a very small niche. I can only think of a couple other examples off the top of my head, and there's only one other book I can think of which I enjoyed reading as much as 2-2 Solid Flesh. That'll probably be the subject of a future video. Probably. But yeah, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. 2-2 Solid Flesh, Nick O'Donohoe, I'm Xavier, this is Strange Detectives, and I'll see you next week.